Sulek finally gave the news that the Muslims turned their attention towards the Jews because the Jews were always conspiring against the Muslims in some way or another. The Battle of the Trench was also initiated by these Jews. Before the divine revelation, it was impossible to attack them because if the Muslims thought of attacking them, the people of Mecca could attack the Muslim. After the agreement with Arabia, there was to be no fighting with the people of Mecca for 10 years. So this was the best time to deal with the Jews, and the headquarters of the Jews was Khaybar. The fortress of Khaybar was one of the strongest fortresses in all of Arabia. Now it is almost entirely desert, but in Khaybar there were farms and fruits in abundance, which were exported all over Arabia. The money earned from this was kept safe by the Jews because they knew that conquering Khaybar was impossible. The Muslims secretly began preparations to attack Khaybar, but the hypocrites of Medina informed the people of Khaybar, saying, "Brothers, an army of only 1,500 men is coming towards you, and you are already in large numbers. You can easily defeat them." The Jews also took this news very lightly. One morning, the Jews went out to work in their fields when suddenly the Muslim army appeared before them. They started shouting, "Muhammad has come, Muhammad has come," and ran back to the fort. If you go by car today, it takes about 2 to 2.5 hours to reach Khaybar. This fort had two main sections. One section had 5 large forts, and the other had 3 forts. The Muslims first attacked the forts of Khaybar. Despite many attempts to conquer the first fort, there was no success. Then Rasulullah said, "Tomorrow I will give the flag to a man who loves Allah and His Messenger, and Allah and His Messenger love him." All the companions were hopeful that they would be the ones to receive the flag. Hazrat Umar said, "I have never desired leadership in my life except on this day of Khaybar." Rasulullah ignored all the elder companions and gave the flag to the 29-year-old Ali ibn Abi Talib. Hazrat Ali happily said, "I will fight until my last breath, but if even one person accepts Islam because of me, it is better than all our camels." Hazrat Ali led the army and attacked the first fort. The commander of this fort was Marhab, who was famous throughout Arabia for his strength. No one even dared to think of fighting him. He came forward and challenged the Muslims. Hazrat Ali stepped forward and easily defeated him, which made Hazrat Ali famous as a warrior throughout Arabia. The battle began, and it was a fierce fight. The Jews were also fighting fiercely because they too are people of the book. For them, the concepts of paradise and martyrdom also exist. The battle lasted for a long time, but eventually the Jews evacuated this fort and moved to the next fort. In this way, the first fort of Khaybar was conquered. For 3 days, the Muslims could not conquer the second fort because, once again, the Jews fought fiercely and then abandoned this fort, fleeing to the third fort. The third fort also could not be conquered for many days, and the Muslims were puzzled. They had blocked all the food and water supply routes, so why weren't the Jews coming out to fight? One day, a Jewish spy who was spying for the Muslims came and informed them that the forts of Khaybar were very old, and the Jews had built secret tunnels underneath them. Through these tunnels, they were bringing water and supplies into the fort. The Muslims went and blocked these tunnels, and a few days later, the Jews came out of the fort and began fighting the Muslims. Whoever came forward to fight faced the same fate. The Muslims easily conquered the fort, and the Jews abandoned the fourth fort and moved to the fifth and final fort. Conquering the fifth fort seemed impossible because it was built on top of a mountain. Anyone who approached it was driven away by the Jews with arrows. This is why the Jews had kept their women and children in this fort, and all their wealth, gold, silver, and everything else was stored here. If history has taught us one thing, it is that the Jews always have the most money. The Muslims tried very hard to conquer this fort, but it seemed impossible. There was no other way, so Rasulullah used technology and brought out rams and catapults. They began bombarding the Jews and breaking down the walls of the fort. After much effort, one side of the fort's wall collapsed, and upon seeing this, the Muslims launched a full-scale attack. The Jews abandoned their women, children, gold, and silver, and fled to another part of the fort. Now, some historians say that the last 3 forts surrendered, while others say that 2 forts surrendered, and there was a battle at 1 fort. Finally, after a fierce battle, the Jews surrendered, and Rasulullah forgave them all. However, half of the food and fruit production in Khaybar had to be given to the Muslims. The Jews happily agreed to this. From Khaybar, the Muslims received so much gold and wealth. Hazrat Umar said that after Khaybar, for the first time, we ate to our fill. The Muslims who had migrated from Mecca to Medina returned the money to their brothers in Medina. The Muslims, who were once a poor community, were now one of the most powerful and wealthy communities in Arabia. Now, the question is, why were there so many Jews in Arabia, and why did they live in Medina and its surrounding areas? Please leave a comment if you want second part, like, and share with others, and subscribe to Muslim Timeline.